This is the Other 22 Hours podcast. Hey, and welcome to this week's episode of the Other 22 Hours podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Shafer-Haiss.
And I'm your host, Michaela Anne. And since the show is not even a year old, if you are just now checking us out, we really appreciate it. And if you are coming back from listening to other episodes, we really appreciate that as well.
Yeah, we know there are thousands of podcasts out there, so the fact that you guys come back for even just 2 episodes really means a lot to us. And if you are a returning listener, we got a really simple ask for you. Chances are you heard about this through somebody else, whether it was on social media or word of mouth or whatever it is. If you could just take a second and pay that forward and pass it along the same way that you found out about it, it would go a long way in getting new listeners to the show. And the more listeners we have, the more guests we can have, and the more ideas we can share back with you. And that's the whole point of this thing.
Yeah, and we're not your typical music promo show. We like to talk to artists in their off time. So we're not wanting to talk about the latest record they're promoting or their latest tour. We focus on the behind the scenes tools and routines they've found helpful in staying inspired, creative, and sane while building a career around their art.
Yeah, and a lot of our listeners are musicians as well. So as you know, there is a ton of things in this industry that are completely outside of our control. And so we wanted to focus on what is within our control. Keeping that in mind, we invited some of our friends and some of our favorite artists on to have a conversation about all the other times that are normally outside of the public eye and ask them the basic question, what do you do to create sustainability in your life so you can sustain your creativity? I will say that today's guest maybe has the most interesting way that she stays grounded. We ended the episode by asking, what are some things outside of your massive list of artistic endeavors? What do you do to just kind of blow off steam or to stay level? And she responded very quickly and very enthusiastically with scuba diving. We are talking about Ezinma.
Most people are like, I go running or try and do yoga, but no, she's a scuba diver. She's also an incredibly accomplished violinist, composer, educator, runs a nonprofit, has played in Beyonce's band, and was in Beyonce's historic 2018 Coachella performance.
Yeah, she's composed for a bunch of different films like Angel City about women's soccer that was just on HBO. She composed the score for the Times of Bill Cunningham documentary, a bunch of different things.
She also has performed or played with Rihanna, Stevie Wonder, Kendrick Lamar, Joshua Bell, Yo-Yo Ma. She is an incredible artist, blending many different genres, and also seems like an incredibly kind person.
And without further ado, here's our conversation. Thank you so much for being here and carving out time for us.
Of course, it's my pleasure.
We wanted to start because we do some research on people beforehand, and your team sent us some stuff. And it seems you've been on a bunch of TV shows and talked a lot about this viral video that you had. And to pull back the curtain on our end, we get pitched almost weekly by publicists like, hey, we have this artist, they have this viral video, like blah, blah, blah. And with no disrespect, it seems like the viral video for them was the start of things. And looking into you, you have so much going on. You have such depth and breadth to what you're doing. It seemed, in my judgment, that this viral thing was just something that happened in the normal case of you being, in my judgment, very prolific in what you do. Obviously, it opened a bunch of doors, but like, how did that moment affect your creativity and like you as an artist? Did it change things?
Yeah, that's a really fascinating question because I think for a lot of especially new independent artists, having a viral moment is something that can be such a goldmine for so many people. I think from a monetary standpoint, but then from the perspective of creativity, I found it a bit limiting. I think there was something about having all these eyes and knowing that something worked and naturally wanting to gravitate towards rinse and repeat this and see what happens. And while that allows for a very successful business model, I don't always think that is conducive to really being in alignment with one's creative voice. So I found after that moment, to your point, I've been playing the violin my entire life. I've been in the industry working and recording for a very long time. It really was something that really allowed me to catapult what I was already doing. However, it did, I think, shift some of the wiring in my brain where I was suddenly more focused about what's going to get a reaction from social media instead of what am I really trying to say. And it's interesting, from that video, I then signed with Universal, had this record deal, and it was interesting because once again, I was faced with really thinking about things from the side of the consumer rather than from the side of me and what I want to say. So I ultimately, while I have no regrets about anything because it really allowed me to launch a lot as a creative, as a businesswoman, as somebody who's, started a nonprofit, it really opened a lot of doors for me. And yet I do feel like there were some side effects creatively that I could not have foreseen without having experienced it. And also, this is just me personally. I think there are some people in which it is freeing to just know that, hey, like, I don't have to be bound to an algorithm. But I think for me, I was like, oh my gosh, all of these eyes. And I was scared and like getting anxiety about what people were saying, what people were thinking. I also got some backlash from the classical community. Not as much anymore, but it was a lot at the time to just go from, oh, it's just my community of creatives to a world of people who I don't know, who are there mostly out of positivity, but not always. It was a really wild experience.
I feel like fame or a large audience, even though that can be a goal for many of us because of what it allows you to do, it also can be terrifying. I think about that all the time. I have a very small audience. I know a lot of my fans and I don't experience mean comments online. I often wonder if sometimes I can feel limited by like, well, I don't want that getting in the big arena because of all of the negativity that can come with it as well. And then the expectation of, okay, how do you sustain that? And how do you do it again? And then all the other people that might come on board for you, like the record deal and other brand partnerships and stuff that then are expecting you to keep doing it. Where are you right now with that kind of stuff? And have you found ways to help yourself work through it and get back to your centered artistry?
I'm going to respond to the first and then I'll answer your question. So in response to the arena, I think as artists, we're always really examining internally what is your arena for us. I think for some people it's getting a big audience. I think for other people, even the most famous artists, I think it's being authentic. I think you can be a very successful artist with tens of hundreds of millions of streams, all these followers, and not feel authentic. And I think we see that a lot with a lot of really big pop stars. I think especially people who started young. So I think the arena can look like very different things, which leads me to answer your question. And right now I'm in this place where I'm working on my album, and it's really interesting because this feels in so many ways like the first time I've really been able to pull back the curtain and be authentic to my voice. Coming from the classical world, so much of our training is playing what's already been written, performing, interpreting, reimagining, all of that stuff. So even though there is a ton of creativity and a ton of expression, it's within a framework that I always found very limiting. Then fast forward, I started playing with bands and touring, and that has its own restrictions. And then the social media thing, that was its own thing. And then this record deal thing, that was its own restrictions. Right now, I've since left Universal and everything's on good terms. But since leaving, I'm like, okay, what do I want to say? And what do I want people to feel? Who am I as an artist? And it's really exciting to just feel like the shedding of skin, like a snake or, like these insects that like leave their skin. That's what it feels like. And I think this for me is a new arena. And it's not so much about amassing followers or fans or streams. It's really just about being really honest about where I am in life right now.
I love that.
How long did it take you to get back to that after you had your viral moment? Did it take a lot of work?
Yeah, it took a long time. And it's interesting because I've been working the entire time. I've been performing. I've been doing tons. But I think silently in the background, I've just been really reprogramming and processing everything that's happened. Because, it happens fast. And I think there's something about success in which it happens when you don't expect it, which is why I think it's so important to always be ready. But something that I wasn't aware of is the readiness just isn't in like finger dexterity and like being able to put on a show. It's also in having the emotional preparedness, the support of your family and your friends, having people to just check you, even things about budgeting or things about what I want my brand to be, or all of these little details, exercising and how much am I going to be eating and What am I going to be putting into my body? All of these things that I think really easily can be thrown out the window when you're just like thrown into a situation where you're like, all right, the calendar's really busy and you're on a plane every week and it's awesome. And I think going back, I would just tell my younger self to just really make sure that the garden of support and like the root system is really nourished so that I'm really fortified in that expansion.
Yeah, I think in my own life and experience, and then also as I've observed, lots of friends on having different like moments of buzz or bumps in their career, it's something that I didn't think about when I was younger, of just the emotional care that it takes, because it's almost like a sugar rush.
Yeah.
And
like
having, like extreme dopamine hits, and like how to manage that because of just like the depletion that can come with the come down, and also the addiction that can come from it, and the morphing in your mind of just, oh, okay, that's what I need.
Right.
And what does it say about myself and my identity and all these things, especially for, I think if you've spent your life training and working to become a competent musician, to then also be an artist, there's always that semi-attached on varying levels for all of us of building an audience for that.
Right.
And then always checking that relationship of like, okay, well, how much do I want to be like catering to my perception of my audience, and how much do I need to be cultivating what is me, and then also what my personal life is, that I think we also can forget at times of intense career growth, that the personal life can be a little like, okay, that's there and I got to focus on my career because this is hot right now, versus, oh, this is really essential to make sure that it's intentional to nurture this, like you said, the root system, which is a really beautiful way to think about that.
And I think like just to add to that, it's not permanent. It's a bump. It's a spike. It's something in which what goes up must come down. And I don't mean that in a negative sense, but it's more just everybody's time. It ebbs and flows. And I think that's even more of a reason to just be, your personal life, your spiritual life, your physical health, everything to really be supported that way. When things do slow down, you're not stuck with like, oh my gosh, I have all of these holes in which I haven't really nurtured them. So I think there's something there that I have really been examining, and it feels so good to just feel things patching and coming together.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. Over the last few years, I've really taken pride in filling those holes, but in balance. I can very easily just be completely consumed with my career and my ambition blindly in a way, and really only focus on that, and then I don't notice all these holes, and then when it does slow down, or when I burn out inevitably, or whatever it is, there's no net, and then I have to like kind of scramble back. And so I'm really trying to be more proactive and more present in being around it and being balanced. And even if I have this burning ambition and all of these mostly self-imposed deadlines of like, oh, this needs to be here, to like be patient and trust that will happen, and to like really focus on the stuff that's behind the scenes a little bit more.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I'm curious how education plays a role in this for you, because from my research, both of your parents were professors, correct?
Yeah.
And you have a lot of education. You have 2 masters, is that correct?
Yeah.
Aaron went to Interlochen for high school.
Oh, cool. I went to Interlochen, yeah.
Did you go to the academy or did you go to the camp?
I did the summer camp, and it like kicked my ass. It was like the best thing ever.
Yeah, I went to 2 years of I never went to the camp, but I went to 2 years at the academy.
Did you like it?
Oh, it changed my life.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I would not be where I'm at without that. Yeah, it's an incredible place. And everything that I heard about the camp was that it was just like way more strict.
It was so intense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, like we had the same uniform. We had to wear like the light blue collared shirts and the navy blue pants. But like it was the academy. Literally, people would just cut the collar off a shirt and stuff it into a t-shirt and then be like, all it said is that we needed to wear a light blue collar. So I got the light blue collar, and they would let it slide. I don't know if it's like that now. This is years ago, but.
So you got the rebels at the academy.
Yeah, exactly. Partly because like we all had to deal with the winter there, which was pretty long and pretty dark. But artistically, it just completely changed my life. And I was there as a percussionist, like the drum set guy on campus. I played percussion and I played marimba, but like nowhere near what everybody else was doing. So it was like incredibly intimidating. But I played in the jazz ensemble and I played in the combo, and when there was like a drum set part in the percussion ensemble, I'd play that. I think that's kind of why I got in. They're like, oh, this guy can actually play drum set. Not to be totally self-deprecating, but you mentioned you got some pushback from the classical music world. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Sorry to co-opt your question here.
No, I can merge it all together. It's interesting because I think, like, back to your question, Michaela, about education in terms of classical training, and this also relates to Interlochen, it's very much about mastering, perfection, crafting. I'm just throwing out keywords. It's very, very competitive. It's very, everybody could be playing the same piece. This person's tone is that, or that person is a little... everybody, there are massive differences, but to most people it just sounds the same. Mm-hmm. But I think there's this culture around in the classical space. It is changing, but it's still there, where it's very much about your pedigree. Who did you study with? Where did you go to school? What type of violin are you playing? And all of this stuff. And I think because of just that sort of culture, coming in playing, let's say, Paganini with like very ratchet 808s, that's a reaction that for me, it was like there were a lot of negative things, like, this is blasphemous. Who are you to think you can do this? And it's really just because it's very disruptive to the culture. And I think when I went to Interlochen, I'm originally from Nebraska, and I was just the best in my school, the best in my state, and all that stuff. And I think walking into a space where you're like, oh, okay, this is what these kids are doing, it really forced me to level up. And, I think just that experience of constantly being like, oh, okay, I love to be around people who are significantly better than me. And I think that's why I just keep going to school. I like being forced to just level up. And school is not the only way to do that. There's so many ways to do that. I think for me, it was just when the pandemic hit, I was like, you know what, let me just go back to school. And I went to Berkeley and I got a master's degree in film scoring because I'd done some film work and didn't really know what I was doing. So that's why I went back to school. But yeah, I think I kind of answered everything.
You definitely did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was asking that also because we also went to the new school.
Oh, cool. Yeah, me too.
We went to the jazz school.
Oh,
which
cool.
I guess now Manus and the jazz school are combined.
They're combined, yeah.
Which totally makes sense to me. When we were there, Manus was still on like 82nd
Yeah,
Street or
like
something. We were down on 13th Street,
Yeah,
and it
yeah,
made
yeah.
no sense to me. Coming from Interlochen, where like, I was there and I like loved jazz, and I was going to the library and taking out like every jazz record they had,
Right.
and I was learning about that and totally getting my ass kicked jazz wise in what was happening there on top of the classical way. But I learned so much from all of the classical musicians that were there, the people that were in there, until we had to be in our dorm rooms like shedding etudes and like going deep, which is not a world that I came from. But I
Right.
could take that, and that influenced the way that I was driven and the way that I focused on my craft, and it was pretty amazing.
Well, and what's
Yeah.
interesting about what you were saying about the classical world and also coming from like an institutional background, I feel like a lot of us who graduated from the New School Jazz feel similar, which has always been fascinating to me, where jazz music was created by people who were pushing boundaries. And now it's become institutionalized, and a lot of us felt very confined of like, oh, if we don't play in the way that they're telling us we're supposed to, then we are not good, which never made sense to me. So I think it's interesting when people go through that and continue to choose it as well, but then have the bravery and the will to be like, I'm going to continue to push boundaries and show that this isn't the only way, and also become an educator yourself, which I also teach music, and we both also worked a lot in the teaching artist programs in New York City and did like after school programs and stuff in Harlem and in Brooklyn. So there's a lot of overlap when I was reading about what you do. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about also how then becoming an educator overlaps and then feeds your own artistic mission by trying to share with others as well.
Yeah. Oh, man, that's so cool that you guys are also teaching in New York. I don't know, I find it really, I enjoy teaching. I genuinely love working with people of all ages, adults and children. I just think it's really fun to teach. But from sort of a zoomed out perspective, I really think, this is very cliche and corny, but I genuinely believe this. I think there's so much growth and change that can happen in the world through music. To be a good musician, you have to be able to be collaborative. You have to be able to sit down with people who you don't even need to speak the same language, right? You can really work with anyone if you understand music. And I see a lot of times, especially with high schools, I've done some things in like East Harlem, these really underserved communities where maybe behavior isn't the best in the classroom, right? A lot of lashing out. And I'll never forget, I was at Isaac Newton Middle School and they kind of warned me like, this is a group that's, don't know what they're going to say. We're grateful you're here.
We've experienced those as well.
Oh, yeah.
But it's amazing because as soon as the music starts, it's like they're there and they're hooked and they're listening and they're engaged. And I think there is something there that I really want just the educational system as a whole to understand. And I think after COVID, a lot of, especially schools in which funding is already tight, music's going to go. And I think, if anything, that should be like the thing that stays, because that's really what, if you read biographies about some of these great artists, that's what saves people oftentimes is music, and having that one teacher or that one person or that one, I don't know, keyboardist in church who let them hop up and like shadow them when they were 6 years old, and it changes their life. So for me, I just think music education, in addition to enjoying it, I do just see it as a vehicle for social change.
That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. It's studying music and practicing music is just so beneficial in so many ways that aren't seen. It's this really unique blend. I'm probably going to botch this because this is like a half-baked thought that's been in my head for a while, and now it's coming out of my mouth into a microphone on a podcast.
It's a safe space.
People that have heard this before are used to me saying this, and hopefully this lands. But it's this like really great blend of when you're practicing music, it's focus and you're working on focus, but then you can tangibly see results. And to me, that creates a feedback loop of interest. It focuses on the process.
Right.
It really teaches somebody like, oh, I worked at this and look at what I did. You get pride, you get this sense of ownership in it that can extend to so much more.
Yeah, no, that's a fully baked idea, because I just feel that in so many ways you're teaching children how to learn, and you're teaching people how to learn and how to master. And I think for me, earlier in the conversation, we were talking about holes in our lives and everything. And I think, if you imagine it as a table and we have different legs in which the table stands on, and I think knowing how to study an instrument and music and practice and put in your time every day or whatever your practice schedule is, that's a leg. And I think for kids, especially just having confidence in something, and especially when that something is also an outlet. Oh man, I was bullied, or oh man, I don't fit in, or oh man, like my parents suck, or whatever it is. I think there's so many ways that music can just really provide many legs for the table, so that if you lose one leg, the table still is standing. And I think it's just such a powerful and holistic thing. And honestly, like the best thing my parents ever did for me was listen to me when I begged to play the violin at 4 years old. And I don't know where that came from, because they had no idea kids could play music, but they were like, oh, okay, we'll like rent this little thing, and that was that. I have no idea where I would be without music, honestly.
Yeah, I think often about when I've taught young kids how you can see the confidence building of, when they would get frustrated with learning a song, I would actively be like, remember that other song that you didn't know how to play? And then remember you got frustrated, but we kept going. And now isn't that song easy? And just like step by step reminding them of, you felt like something was hard before and you kept at it. And now you have evidence of you can play it and it feels like no problem. Time and time again, I would see these little brains be like, oh yeah, okay, I'll keep trying.
Right.
And I feel like I also teach more adults now, but you have to kind of do the same thing. And then that translates to so many aspects in our life. As we become adults, it's even harder to have patience with ourselves when something feels frustrating or hard, to be like, wait, remember I've been here before.
Right.
And what do I do? Can you share a little bit about Strings by Heart and where that idea came from? And
yeah, I mean, it really just sort of ties into what we're talking about. Strings by Heart is a nonprofit that I started in the middle of the pandemic, which is, that feels like yesterday, but also it just feels like a completely different century.
I know.
But anyway.
It's a different lifetime at the same time.
Yeah. So I started it then, and basically it's devoted to providing free instruments, free music education, community outreach, and also just me doing outreach within schools in the U.S. as a whole. And it's based in New York City, and yeah, it's just my passion project to everything we've said in this conversation, just to help bring music to more people. Also, it's specifically focused on classical music because Black and brown people were very underrepresented in that space. It's sort of two things. It's to help just give kids access, but also in providing access, bring more inclusivity and diversity into the classical space. And honestly, starting a nonprofit is no joke, especially when you're working with kids, but it's just been so amazing. We work with Shore Music, they're our instrument partner, and yeah, so we're just getting ready to do some outreach this fall. It's really exciting and something that I've always wanted to do, and I always thought I would do it when I was like, I don't know, 60 or something, like, oh, I'll wait to get there. But I don't know, I just, when the pandemic hit and just all these kids at home and parents struggling, I just started putting up like online how to make a violin at home, and it just snowballed into things. And I was like, let's just do it now. And even if we're only helping 3 kids, let's say hypothetically, that's 3 kids who then help 3 more kids, who help 3 more kids, who help 3 more kids. And it's just amazing. So far, our reach has been about 400 and some children so far. So
Wow.
yeah, it's been really great.
Cool.
Do you have a staff or a team that helps with that, or?
Yep. It's
Okay.
me, my nonprofit manager. I have an assistant, and then my management team. They help with just like facilitating. But we're
That's not
actually
that
looking
many
to
people,
hire-
though.
No, it's really not. And we're looking to hire somebody who can really be on the ground in New York because I just travel and get there. But yeah, so far we've been really doing a lot of outreach and just like talking to groups of kids. But it's exciting. And I think the hardest thing, though, is after the pandemic, just a lot of schools, they're really, really struggling because the children have come back behind in terms of reading and math. And for a lot of children, schools where they get fed, it's safety. It's a tough ecosystem right now. But
Reflecting back on our time when we were in school, it feels just infuriating that it's not an equal playing ground for people and that it has nothing to do with the children. It has, economic disparity, racial injustice, and just the handful of schools that I taught in New York City. You'd go to one school and they would have a surplus of instruments that they didn't know what to do with. And then you'd go to another school. I taught one school where I was just telling the story the other night where it was like a program funded by the Brooklyn Philharmonic. I taught like a keyboard class of over 20 kids and we only had 10 keyboards. I think it took me like a month or 2 to finally like figure out. We had this whole routine that we had to do. Like I'd come in with a bag of extension cords and we had like a map of all these extension cords to be able to, as quick as possible, get every keyboard hooked up and then get partners and switch between like worksheets while the other one's playing. And it was just like such a crazy mindfuck, about like how to just be able to teach without ample supplies. And it was just like, okay, and I know probably down the street there's somebody in a $4 million house that could like buy 1,000 keyboards, no problem. And it just can feel, that's not how the world works, but I wish it was.
I know.
So one of the things as I was doing my internet sleuthing on you is like so much of what it looks like you've been doing is what a lot of people talk about of like our dreams of, oh, I want to do this artistically and I want to have this opportunity and also I want to give back and provide these things. And it looks like you are someone who puts that stuff into action. Is that just your natural personality, or do you have times where you're just like, I feel lazy and I'm going to do the bare minimum? And what do you do when you have to like try and motivate, and what kind of organizational motivation tactics do you have to use?
Wow, that's a great question because I feel in some ways like I'm in that space right now. Let me preface this with the following. I'm very much a deadline person. I love the pressure of this needs to be done, the show, like the set, whatever. I love a deadline. When I don't have deadlines, that's when I feel I have to really test my discipline and capability of just getting stuff done anyway. So right now with this album that I'm working on, it's something where I'm looking at my second screen and I have a whole Google spreadsheet of each piece, the BPM, the key, what's the status. I really have to be incredibly organized. That holds me accountable. I just like seeing things checked off. I have definitely been in a space where it's been much more like loose and free, and I just feel like I'm not as productive. Also, there's a lot going on. I'm going to Toronto Film Festival next week. I also work in film and TV, and with the strike, things are really slow right now. So I find that when I'm very busy, I am incredibly productive. It's when things are
Yep.
slow that I'm really have to use these tools to like stay on it and set timer for 2 hours, put my phone in a different room, turn off my Wi-Fi, just find little tricks to just really get me to focus on the task at hand. And it's interesting. I feel like when I was younger and before social media, I would just focus. I'd read for hours. I'd practice for hours without looking at any phone because there's really nothing to look at. And I do feel just my attention span has gotten so much shorter. So because of that, I just have to do things to just actively push back that interruption. In terms of giving back, I don't know. I just think it's just from my experiences. I think just from my parents divorced when I was 5, and they're both professors. But when my parents divorced, my mom, she moved away from the university to go to the university in Illinois. And so I was commuting between Nebraska and Illinois when I was 5 years old.
Oh, wow.
Then she left Illinois, came back to Nebraska, gave up her job as a professor, and was substitute teaching. Because the way professorships work is it's, sort of like the Supreme Court. You gotta wait till somebody is old or resigns or dies to really get the job at the university. So for a long time, my mom was living below the poverty line, and my dad was middle class. So I think because I saw these two very different things, first of all, I think because of just the fact that I had two very different situations culturally, financially, in terms of just like structure and everything, and parenting styles, I think that's why I enjoy blending genres so much. I think that's why I like taking classical and mixing it with more modern styles and twisting things and subverting things, because that's just sort of my upbringing. I've been oscillating between two different things my whole life. But I think on the other side of that is, it's no joke. Like poverty and not having what you need is something that as a child, you really have no say. Like my mother has been an incredible mother and really did everything she could. Also, I'd like to point out the privilege that I had in my dad, who was able to step in and like help buy a refrigerator or a dryer or whatever things that we needed. But it's just interesting because I think that experience really made me compassionate towards so many families that just, life is hard. Forget about music, but just like survival and getting your kids to school and paying for medical bills and all these things. So I think just because of that experience, I've always known that I really want to give to kids, because I feel in so many ways like I was so privileged to have the life even that I had. So that's sort of, I think, where it comes from. And I think that's also where just my musical taste of just mixing styles comes from, is just my whole childhood and the way I was raised.
Has mixing styles and all of that been an interest to you all along, or is that something that you've come to later on?
No, definitely all along. I mean, I would do fiddling competitions, like national fiddling competitions.
Yeah.
I'm from Nebraska, and my mom is really into bluegrass, and we grew up on like Bill Monroe, and this isn't really bluegrass, but like Joan Baez, and just really listening to like a lot of these Americana styles. And I just love roots music so much. I would do these fiddling competitions, and I'd be like winning these checks. As a little kid, just had my cowboy boots and did that whole thing. So I was doing that, studying classically. My dad's from Guyana, which is in South America. It's West Indies. We grew up on a lot of reggae, and he loved funk. So I think I just was always exposed to so many styles, and the radio would be on and I would just like jam. And, it was just sort of a part of who I am. But I always just loved classical music. That was my favorite. But to answer your question, yeah, that's just always been a part of my DNA to mix.
Shooting towards earlier, asking about interlocking and asking about coming up through like classical music education, because it seems, in my understanding of learning the violin, there are certain rules that you need to follow to have proper technique, to have proper intonation. And it seems like something that you have to start like pretty early on, and it seems pretty rigid, versus coming from like a percussion background, which there is proper technique, there are certain things, but it's seemingly so much more wiggle room. And I can imagine stepping out from that very rigid and very strict. It feels like there's a gravitational pull to being in that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it really sucks people, and sometimes it can feel hard to get out of it. But I don't know, I would just remember I would just like be making up stuff in like a Mozart concerto. My teacher's like, that's just not in there. What are you doing right now? And I feel like I thought it was in there. The other thing is I would fake reading music. I wasn't reading music, but I was like faking it. And I think that's the other thing, is I just was making up stuff, and I learned things by ear and would pretend that I could read the music for a long time until my teacher finally figured out, and then I of course learned. But yeah, I think it was just, I just have always been not interested in that, in the perfection of it all.
Well, and wonder, like you said, being in kind of two different worlds, economically, also racially, and then also the spaces that you were in with school and studying music, and how from such a young age, I would imagine, and would love for you to speak on if you feel comfortable, of the awareness of where do I belong in the world and the culture for all of these things that the outside world tells me makes me different, or maybe I don't fit into a clean box. And then the parallel and also overlap of music, of how blending genres and working within different musical, how that feeds itself of the personal and then the musical, and then obviously the professional, of just like a path or a journey of like acceptance, also of getting to know yourself when we live in a world that's like, well, you don't quite make sense. Or we live in a country specifically that's like, we like things to be really separated and put into these neat boxes. And when you're someone who doesn't, I think it can take a lot of strength to get to a place of being like, no, there's actually nothing wrong with me, and this diversity is really rich and beautiful.
Yeah. You know, I think just as artists in general, most of us turn to art because we just didn't fit in boxes. I think a lot of my friends that I talk to, it's a lot of us, we just didn't fit in. We maybe were bullied. We were, I don't know, maybe smaller than the other kids. Like I know for me, I skipped a grade, so I was just always the runty one. There's that made me turn to music more. And then the interesting thing is that you have all this creativity, you have all this, I don't fit in, I'm going to put it into my music and my instrument or whatever. And then you become an adult and you need to start making money from music. So then you find that you have to compartmentalize to be successful. So it's sort of this like weird thing of really just peeling back and realizing, hey, I actually don't fit in and I've never fit in. So let's stop pretending here and let's just really lean into that, because that's why I'm an artist to begin with. I think people who are normal, I don't think are artists usually. I think they're other things, but I feel like for us, we have to really lean into that awkwardness, that sort of alienation, that maybe feeling isolated, because that's really what makes us great. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you definitely did. And the seeking, I think that like the seeking and the searching is a big part of creative people and personalities.
Yeah, 100%.
I have a good childhood friend who's a scientist, and he married a fellow scientist, and he's always like, you guys just always seem not settled, or you're always like looking for other things. And anytime I talk to him, he's like, I have no care in the world, I feel great. And I'm just like, yeah, this is like our brains just work very differently.
I know.
He picked a new place to move by never visiting and like making a spreadsheet about the different places and cities. And I'm like, but you didn't go feel it? He's like, no. I'm like,
yeah, it's just so interesting because you think it would be the other way around. You think that we would be the ones who are like, oh yeah, like da da da. But instead, so many of us are just like, oh, what's happening? You know?
Yeah.
And it's just interesting to me. But I think I'm just really learning to just embrace it and be like, this is okay for me to feel confused and uncertain all the time. I know what I'm doing other days. I think it's just a part of it. Or, wow, this is the shittiest thing I've ever recorded in my life. Why am I so bad? But then on the other side, it's like, this is brilliant. Those things happen within 10 minutes of each other.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah. And sometimes
Yeah.
I feel that same way about the same piece of music. It just happened earlier.
Right.
I wrote something with this guy and I haven't finished filling out, and he was just checking in on it earlier. And I was like, yeah, I just had to step away and work on something else for a little while. There's no deadline to this. And
Yeah.
in my head, I've known about it for the last 3.5 months and been like, yeah, I think we kind of just missed the mark on it. You know, it's just not quite there. I listened back, I was like, oh no, this is actually like, this is good. Like, and before I was like, I give up. This is the last thing I'm ever going to write.
So it's like, moral of the story, I guess, just like, don't judge yourself because you're going to change your mind.
Yeah. I want to ask about what you do writing for film and TV. We've had a few different composer friends on here.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what you do? I see you have a long list of films and documentaries that you've written for.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing because you have feedback. You know, you have a director or a producer or the music supervisor who's, like, we're loving this, like this direction. And it's so interesting because the way I approach TV and film and documentaries is I watch it, read the script, whatever, and then I just write themes. I write a bunch of themes, maybe like the resilience theme or maybe the empathy theme, like sort of like these really big words, and I sort of build a palette around these thematic concepts. And then from there, I derive cues. But when I write the themes, I then send them to the director, the music editor. If they love it, the cool thing is they can start editing with the thematic material I've written. So I just did this show for HBO called Angel City, and that's what happened, is because I came on and wrote all this thematic material and they loved it. I mean, I wrote probably like an hour and a half worth of music. And from there, they sort of edit to it, which then makes the process pretty quick because you already have established a sound world and a tonal world, and you've established the psychology musically of the project. Then from there, you get more granular and you're really tailoring and writing to the picture specifically. But I find that working thematically and just getting on the same board creatively with the team helps a lot. It's interesting though, because we are creatives when we write music, and we aren't really accountable to anyone. I mean, I guess, unless you have a really controlling label, but it's really just what you want. And with film and TV, it's not about you. It's about the story. It's about the show. It's about what's the dialogue needs to be heard. And so it's all of these things that I think as a recording artist and performer first, that's something that I really had to shift gears when I do that type of work. And also, it's really fun. Like, I really enjoy the collaborative nature and the communication and the team, and getting to work with the sound design and getting clips of the soccer players, because Angel City was about women's soccer, their sounds from their practice, like the balls and their grunts, and turning it into beats. And it's really fun. It's just a very different type of creativity than just writing music for yourself.
Yeah, the little bit of work I've done has been mostly as like an assistant composer and all of that. But just in general, and it comes from our time in New York as well, like interacting with creatives in another medium is so inspiring to me.
Right.
I write music for TV, but it's not to picture. It's more like in a licensing and a placement kind of angle. I get briefs a lot, and I'm writing to all of that, and like really putting my compositional brain and writing brain in the space of being a film director or a director of photography, something like that, and thinking about the shot and different camera angles and approaching music in that way is a really inspiring approach to me.
Yeah,
you get
that's
to see
so
that.
cool.
It also, from what I've gleaned from people, is when you're writing for picture and when you're writing for film, is definitely you're jumping into the deep end of not being precious and not being attached.
Yeah, I was going to ask how those shorter deadlines, like if you're making a record, maybe you're like, oh, I've got several months. But where I took one film scoring class in college and was like, this is way too much anxiety for me. I will never do this. But witnessing, do you know Osei Esset by any chance?
Osei Esset. I've heard the name.
Osei is our very close friend who's scored quite a few HBO documentaries, the True Justice documentary of Bryan Stevenson. Aaron worked on that with him, and a ton. He just did a Disney movie.
Yeah, he's in LA a lot working with Dan Romer.
Yeah, Dan's great.
Yeah. Anyways, Osei is like our window into, not to mention that Aaron worked on a film with him, but I'm always like, this seems so intense of like how quick it moves.
Yeah.
Because he'll also call Aaron and be like, hey, can you do this like drum recording for me real quick? I need it by like tonight. So how does that affect your ability to create? Does that motivate you? Does it make you feel less precious? Does it make you panic?
Yeah, I mean, I just love deadlines. I love the pressure. I love I need this now, but
So
staying calm, and I really enjoy it. And with the strike, I do miss it, but it is not for everyone. I think there's a personality type that excels in that space, and you're just going to get a lot of your ideas axed, and you're going to have to turn something around the next day. And especially if you're working on these animated films where there's tons of orchestration, it's a lot. It's a very demanding field, but I think one that, you don't always get a lot of attention. It's a very behind the scenes space, but it's just really fun. I just enjoy it. And I also just love the process of, we got the special effects and like getting the new cuts and like seeing how things get better and improving. But, it's a lot of technical, and I mean like technological things, being able to make really good mock-ups. It's a lot. I feel lucky that I'm also a performer. I think to just be a film composer, that's not really something I'm interested in. But I do like how it works with performing.
Yeah, it's a great way of putting it. I feel the same way with the writing for TV that I do, because I do a lot of it, but when it exceeds 50% of what I'm doing, it becomes soul-sucking in a way.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting and inspiring framework to work in. I like the pace. I like that mindset. But if that's all I'm doing, it feels a little rote, a little
Yeah.
mass produced in a way.
What I love about performing is just immediate validation. You have immediate response to what you're doing. You're getting it in real time. And, when I submit to directors, it's like, when are they going to approve it? Like, what's going to happen? Is this another rewrite? I feel like, if anything, I have to be even more zen about when I'm working on a media project, just because, who knows? All of my hard work might just be axed, and like the thing that I did in 20 minutes might be like their favorite thing in the world. So you just don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I have one more question before
Okay.
we go. Of just, it's been so cool to talk to you about, and just having so many different artistic projects in your life. It sounds like they all feed each other and give space from the others. But what are some of the things, non-musical, non-artistic things that you found in life that have been essential to you staying centered, grounded, healthy?
And do you have time for anything
Yeah.
else? Because your list of what you're doing is so deep.
I'm really into scuba diving. I'm a scuba diver.
Oh.
So that is something that I love because, first of all, you can die, right? Like, it's like, it's one of those things where you're like, my partner, he also scuba dives. So for instance, if we're having like a fight, and then as soon as we go into the ocean, you're at 130 feet, and like, he's my buddy. If something happens where my oxygen, he's there to save me and I'm there to save him. And it just puts everything into perspective, just to like, you have to breathe slowly because you can't suck through all your air. You have to be calm. You just kind of chill down there. And it's something that I have really found a lot of important symbolism and leaning into that. And I'm getting certified for rescue and master diver, kind of like the highest you can be as a recreational diver. And it's just so cool, and the gear, and sort of like the music world where, like, what are you using and what I'm gonna but I really enjoyed that. I also box a lot. I'm really into boxing and sparring, and I dislocated my shoulder earlier this year, so I had to like take a break. My manager's like, please stop like doing this. But yeah, I enjoy doing other things. And I think the way my brain is, I just constantly need to have a lot of things that I'm engaged in. Just because it just keeps me balanced and happy.
Yeah. I have a couple scuba diving questions for you.
Oh, yeah.
Say you're sitting at your house and you're like, man, I want to dive. You can't just go and dive, right? Like, do you own a boat to dive? Do you dive from shore? Like
You can just drive and just shore dive.
Like from a pier kind of thing? Or do you literally just walk off the beach and keep going?
And it's so funny because the people on the beach are just like,
Yeah.
we're just gone, We're just like, so we did a night dive, which was really fun. You could see like all the crabs and like baby octopi, I guess is the plural. It's just fun, and we have our little squad and we just go diving.
Cool.
Yeah.
Where's your dive spot? I assume like you don't go to Venice and walk out into the water, or maybe you do.
So not so much Venice, Catalina Island. So LA is cool because there's some really cool places. Catalina Island is great diving. The Channel Islands are also great diving, and it's all like very close. Then there's also some really good spots. Just we're doing a beach cleanup in Santa Monica, so that's really not going to be nice. That's going to just be like a lot of junk, but just to help pick up trash and stuff like that. But yeah, there are just some like great spots. I always go with a group. It's just more fun that way, and then you can like all get beers afterwards.
Yeah. So I take it this is something you picked up in California, or did you pick up?
Yeah, definitely California. I would not do this. I mean, you could do it in New York, but yeah, it's going to be really cold. And I obviously didn't do this in Nebraska because no options there.
Yeah, I can't imagine diving anywhere around New York unless you had a few hours upstate. And
Well, they've had a bunch of shark sightings this summer off of like Fort Tilden and stuff. So
that's one thing you got to be careful about.
Yeah.
I love what you said, and the way that it could be a metaphor in life of just that you have to breathe slowly and can't go through your oxygen and stay calm and all that stuff. So very cool.
Highly recommend.
Man, thank you so much. You're
Thank you,
fascinating. I'm really excited to follow all of your endeavors for the rest of your life.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I can't wait to. I
was like, how do I say this?
Don't worry, that doesn't sound creepy at all. You're good.
Thank you. The same to you. Man, thank you both so much. And
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Other 22 Hours podcast. You can find more info on this episode, including links to things that we talked about, by going to theother22hours.com and clicking on episodes.
Reviews go a long way in getting our show in front of more listeners. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to go leave a quick review wherever you listen to podcasts. And we'll see you back here next week for another episode.